Let's welcome back on our guest line U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, who happens to be in one of my favorite places in the world, the upstate of South Carolina. Hey, Senator, how are you?
Mike, it's great to be with you.
Important state for you to appear in on a regular basis, isn't it? South Carolina, crucial, isn't it?
South Carolina is a critical state. We've got an incredible team here on the ground in South Carolina, and I'll tell you what we're seeing in South Carolina is the same dynamic we're seeing in Iowa, New Hampshire, and all across the country, which is that we're seeing conservatives uniting and coming together behind our campaign. It really is very, very.
Whoop. All right.
Is suddenly all my competitors in the Republican Party running for president are spending all their time attacking us, running attack ads, and we've had in the last couple of weeks, we've been attacked twice by Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and the New York Times, to which I say to all of them, I appreciate the endorsement.
and a little bit uniquely, suddenly Marco Rubio is switching focus. Senator Rubio is trying to, it seems, stop a little bit of momentum. According to the New York Times, anyway, they write, for months, Senator Rubio ran an above-the-fray presidential race, high-mindedly dismissing his Republican rivals, promising a campaign his family could be proud of long after 2016. The New York Times says no more. In interviews, speeches, and in stealthier ways, Mr. Rubio has abruptly changed course, zeroing in on Senator Ted Cruz of Texas in an urgent effort to halt his momentum with conservative voters in Iowa and beyond. Senator Cruz, do you plan to change course?
Well, look, our focus is going to continue to be on exactly where it has been, laying out my proven conservative record. I think voters are tired of campaign conservatives, people who talk a good game on the trail but haven't walked the walk, and they're looking for someone who has been a consistent conservative. And listen, we shouldn't be surprised to see rival campaigns devoting their energy to coming after us. Frankly, if they weren't shooting at us, we wouldn't be doing anything. And that has been the pattern of the Washington establishment. What the Washington establishment does, they don't fight Democrats. They attack conservatives. That's where they put their energy. That's where, as you noted, the Rubio campaign is spending their attack ads, spending the candidate's time is trying to attack conservatives, for example, for standing up against President Obama's indefensible plan to bring to America tens of thousands of Syrian Muslim refugees, particularly at a time of terrorism when the FBI cannot vet these refugees. I think it is lunacy to bring the refugees here. Well, I think the Rubio campaign is very, very concerned about this issue because Senator Rubio joined with Chuck Schumer and Barack Obama in the Gang of Eight amnesty bill that would have given President Obama even more authority to bring Syrian refugees here with no background checks. And so I think you can understand why they're attacking, because they're very nervous about those issues. But I'm going to stay focused on the issues the American people care about, because, as you noted just a moment ago, this is an extraordinarily perilous time. We're at a time of war, and we need a leader who will stand up and do what it takes to keep this country safe, and that's exactly what I intend to do.
It's got to be difficult, Senator, for you to decide whether to go back on the defensive or even on the offensive with your fellow Republicans, or keep on the high road. I mean, it's got to be a tough call, because on the one hand, Americans seem to appreciate a Republican not going after another Republican the way you've done. You have not gone after and bashed Donald Trump the way some of your colleagues have. On the other hand, you can't look like you're not defending yourself against criticism and attacks. Is that a difficult decision, Senator?
It's actually not. I'm a big believer in Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment, thou shalt not speak ill of another Republican. And if you look at how Reagan did it, in his entire years in public office, he didn't vilify, he didn't engage in ad hominem insults or personal attacks against his opponents. And that was exactly the right strategy. Now, one thing to be clear, the 11th commandment doesn't mean that you should never have policy disagreements. So my approach has been, if other candidates engage in personal insults or attacks, I will not reciprocate, I will not respond in kind. Indeed, I try to follow the biblical principle that when you repay unkindness with kindness, that's like heaping coals on top of their head. And so the mudslinging and the personal assaults, I won't engage in. But policy differences, real differences on issues like amnesty and securing the border, real differences on national security and defeating ISIS, real differences on our tax plan and on repealing Obamacare, all of those are fair game, and I think that's what the voters are interested in, and I think we'll see more and more discussions on substance, which is what we should be talking about.
You know, I kept thinking of Charles Krauthammer's book title, Things That Matter, when I watched President Obama's address last night from the Oval Office, because it sounded like this was a speech largely about things that don't matter. I mean, Senator, it's inconceivable to me that the President of the United States wants to stand at the podium in the Oval Office and talk about things like the no-fly list and gun control, as if ISIS-inspired terrorists are going to worry about gun control laws anywhere in America. And I hear, as one caller just said a few moments ago to me, we're going from being afraid of these terrorists and this issue to being mad.
Yeah, that is exactly right. You know, last night's speech, the president is so out of touch and so unprepared and unwilling to defend this nation. It makes the next year extraordinarily dangerous. We saw the president lecture the American people like some condescending schoolmarm about the need to avoid Islamophobia. What we need is a commander-in-chief who stands up and, number one, doesn't engage in politically correct doublespeak, doesn't refuse to say the words radical Islamic terrorism, as Obama and Hillary and all the Democrats do. But number two, who says, we will defeat ISIS. We are going to carpet bomb them into oblivion. We're going to arm the Kurds. We are going to go and find them and hunt them down and kill them. That is the right response. Instead, what the Democrats do is they give apologies and justifications for ISIS, and they try to go after the constitutional right to keep and bear arms of law-abiding citizens. That is wrong. You know, a couple of days ago in Iowa, I hosted a Second Amendment event at a firing range, and we announced our national Second Amendment coalition. Over 24,000 people nationwide have signed up at tedcruz.org, and have joined our Second Amendment coalition. And the press was all a Twitter how insensitive it was to do a Second Amendment rally in the wake of San Bernardino. And you know, I have to admit, I enjoyed telling the reporters, listen, I don't think it's my job to be sensitive to radical Islamic terrorists. Mm-hmm. And you don't stop the bad guys by taking away our guns. You stop the bad guys by using our guns. And a free and armed American citizenry is how we keep ourselves safe. And we need a president who can distinguish between law-abiding American citizens defending our families and radical Islamic terrorism committing acts of jihad. And President Obama last night showed he's utterly incapable of doing that.
Senator Cruz, you know what an admirer I am of you and how enthusiastic I am about your campaign. Let me ask you about a very difficult issue, and it's multi-layered. But as we know, you've expressed concern, and of course you voted to curtail the NSA metadata program. It came out over the weekend that it seemed the government was a little bit handcuffed from accessing metadata regarding the San Bernardino attack because its NSA access lapsed under this kind of legislation that you've been opposed to. It's got to be can you help us explain your vote and where you are now with giving the government the tools to access metadata and the kind of surveillance that perhaps could thwart a future terror attack as these evildoers use email and texting and various other forms of electronic communication?
Well, sure. This issue is quite straightforward, and I'm very proud of having joined with Mike Lee and other strong conservatives in crafting the USA Freedom Act and passing it, and it is legislation that strengthened America's ability to target terrorists. And you know, look, this is an example. We talked before about you mentioned how Marco Rubio's super PAC is spending $200,000 in attack ads. It's on this issue, and they're trying to distract by somehow saying that conservatives like Mike Lee and I and like the National Rifle Association, all of which supported the USA Freedom Act, somehow are responsible for the Paris terror attack. And it's a silly suggestion, but that's what their ads say. And it's based on the notion that apparently Senator Rubio believes that we would be safer if the federal government had access to your and my cell phones and emails and location at every point. And indeed, unfortunately, Senator Rubio last night dismissed the Fourth Amendment of the Bill of Rights as, quote, ideological silliness. Now, I got to say, I don't think the Bill of Rights or the Constitution is ideological silliness, and I don't think America is safer by giving Lois Lerner access to your and my cell phones and emails. So what did we do in the USA Freedom Act? We ended the federal government's bulk collection of phone metadata of law-abiding citizens. But at the same time, we strengthened the ability to go after terrorists. It's the same distinction we were talking about a minute ago on the Second Amendment. Look, Senator Rubio's argument is the same argument Obama's giving with guns, which is, let's take the guns from the law-abiding citizens. Senator Rubio is saying, let's take the privacy from the law-abiding citizens. The answer to both is no. Protect the constitutional rights of Americans and target the terrorists. And here's the critical fact, Mike. Under the USA Freedom Act, we can now intercept more cell phones. We can get more metadata on the terrorists than we did before. The old program only included a portion of the phone records in existence. Under the USA Freedom Act, law enforcement and national security can now access a much broader universe to target terrorists, which is in fact what we did after San Bernardino. And so the intelligence community told Congress that the USA Freedom Act strengthened their ability to target the terrorists, and the attack ads to the contrary are simply false, and they're knowingly false, unfortunately.
But it does pose a very unique challenge, doesn't it, Senator? Because we understand fundamentally, I think, the need to give the intelligence community tools to anticipate what, for example, a homegrown terrorist who's living in San Bernardino, California, or living in somewhere in the United States, the ability to monitor their conversations and their texts or their emails or their phone calls, right?
Absolutely. And what the USA Freedom Act did is strengthened our ability to do so. Let's step back for a second. If you look at the Obama administration, they keep making this same mistake that Senator Rubio is making, which is they target and focus on law-abiding citizens instead of terrorists. So think back over 5 years ago to Fort Hood, to the terrorist attack that occurred in my home state of Texas.
Right.
The Obama administration knew that Nidal Hassan was in communication with Anwar al-Awlaki, a radical Islamic cleric. They knew that he had asked al-Awlaki about the permissibility of waging jihad against his fellow soldiers. And yet they did nothing because they were so politically correct. They did nothing, and they allowed Nidal Hassan to murder 14 innocent souls. Fast forward a couple years later, the Boston bombing. We knew the Tsarnaev brothers were radical Islamic terrorists. The FBI went and interviewed them. But then they dropped the ball. They stopped monitoring them. The elder Tsarnaev brother posted on YouTube a public call to jihad. The Obama administration didn't notice, and then they carried out the Boston bombing at the marathon. The same thing with San Bernardino, where you've got this couple. The husband flies to the Middle East. The husband is in contact with multiple people on the terrorist watch list. The wife is publicly pledging her allegiance to ISIS on social media. And the Obama administration caught none of that, zero. And the reason is they are not focused on radical Islamic terrorists. What the USA Freedom Act gives is the government the ability to target a terrorist, to seize their cell phone, their emails, to monitor them. And it's a much broader universe that we can now access today than we could under the old program, and that makes us much safer.
It frankly reminds me a bit of Democrats' response to gun control. I mean, it's the same idea. Let's take everybody's right away to keep and bear arms in order to try to keep it out of the hands of terrorists. Let's make sure everybody's cell phone is tapped into and everybody's communication is monitored to try to keep terrorists from being able to communicate, rather than focus on the actual terrorists themselves.
That is exactly right. And the domestic comparison is going after violent criminals. Last week, every Democrat, or virtually every Democrat, voted once again against the Cruz legislation, which is vigorous legislation to target violent criminals that I drafted with Senator Chuck Grassley following the Newtown tragic shooting several years ago. And what it did is it focused on the bad guys. So, for example, every year, tens of thousands of felons and fugitives try to illegally buy firearms. The Obama administration refuses to prosecute them. So the Grassley-Cruz legislation says if a felon or a fugitive tries to illegally buy a gun, you should come down them on a ton of bricks. You should prosecute them. The Democrats all voted against that, or virtually all, because targeting bad guys is not furthering the agenda that they're pushing, which
Right.
is taking away the right to keep and bear arms from you and me. And we've got to distinguish between good guys and bad guys, whether here at home with criminals or here and abroad with terrorists. We've got to be able to tell the difference.
You remember what Rahm Emanuel once famously said, never let a crisis go to waste. Senator Cruz, good to have you in South Carolina. I hope to catch up with you during your swing through the Palmetto State. It's always we're so deeply appreciative of you giving us some of your time on your busy campaign trail. Keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you, Mike, and I appreciate everything you're doing each and every day. Keep speaking out for freedom, and let me tell you, it's working. People are waking up across the country.
God bless you. Ted Cruz here on the Mike Gallagher Show.